Why Africa is economically poor and why it will always remain poor? When did poverty start in Africa? Here's a question that begs an answer. For what reason does a continent with so many natural resources also have some of the world's poorest citizens? Hey folks, welcome back to Studying Scholar. In this video, we're going to find out why will Africans always be poor, and let us dive in. To find the answer, we'd have to go back in time. I can already tell that you are rolling your eyes way back into your head. If I hear about slavery in Africa one more time. Africa's history is the only way to understand what is going on in Africa today. In the 1400s, the Portuguese were the first Europeans to use slaves from Africa to work on sugar plantations in São Tomé, which is off the coast of West Africa. From then on, the most important source of money for Europe's early globalization efforts came from the cruel and dehumanizing trade in Africans, which reached its peak in the 18th century and ended in fits and starts in the late 1800s. About 11 million people were taken against their will and made slaves in the New World, but similar numbers were also sold across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean for hundreds of years. Nathan Nunn, an economics professor, did a study on the effects of Africa's slave trades on economic growth afterward. He came to a clear conclusion. The poorest African countries presently are the ones from which the most slaves were taken, he wrote in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. The story doesn't end there, though. The slavery of black people made way for another cruel system, but this one gets even less sympathy from the public. Boris Johnson, who is now our Foreign Secretary, wrote about Britain's colonial past in Africa in 2002. The continent may be a blot, but it is not a blot on our conscience. The problem isn't that we used to be in charge, it's that we're no longer in charge. In 2016, 44% of people who answered a YouGov poll agreed with him that Britain's history of colonialism was something to be proud of. Because this system of oppression, which was based on greed and white supremacy, was not lived by the people of this fair isle like segregation was in the US, and because it is still not taught in our schools, we fool ourselves into thinking that empire was a good thing, and we fall for politicians' promises to bring us back to the good old days. What time exactly are we trying to go back to? All of Africa's colonial rulers destroyed the people's way of life and taught them to hate everything about themselves, including their skin color, language, clothing, and traditions. They even lost their gods. Frantz Fanon, a psychoanalyst and revolutionary writer, put it this way in his book The Wretched of the Earth, which came out in 1961. Colonialism does not stop at holding a people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. It uses twisted logic to look at the past of the victimized people and change, destroy, and distort it. Why is Africa still poor, according to international influences? The world community has long been puzzled by the fact that despite its tremendous natural riches, Africa remains impoverished. Many ideas exist to explain this contradiction, and many of them blame international causes for Africa's persistent poverty. According to one theory, the legacy of colonialism is to blame for Africa's poverty. Africa was exploited for its riches during colonial control, and its people were denied the opportunity to create their own economies. This thesis contends that the continent has never recovered from this historical injustice, and that the developed world's continuous exploitation of Africa has kept it destitute. Another theory relates Africa's poverty to the global economic system. According to this viewpoint, the global economy is structured in a way that benefits the developed world and disadvantages the developing world. Because of Africa's low position in the global economic hierarchy, it will always be poor compared to other continents. Both of these views have some validity. Africa's history of colonization and exploitation has undoubtedly contributed to its current poverty, and the global economic system does favor industrialized countries over underdeveloped countries. However, these are not the main causes of Africa's current predicament. Africa is also plagued by weak government and corruption. Many African governments are not democratically elected and therefore do not represent their people's interests. Instead, they are frequently ruled by a few elites who enrich themselves at the expense of the rest of the population. As a result, Africa's resources are not being used to help the majority of the population, but rather are being sucked off by a few. Keeping this in mind, what is the future of poverty in Africa? Will it always remain poor? According to World Data Lab, most of the world's poor live in Africa. More than 150 million people live in extreme poverty in just two countries, Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Its system says that nearly 80% of the countries that won't be able to get rid of poverty by 2030 will be in Africa. When the number of people living in poverty is taken into account, the percentage goes up to more than 90%. The United Nations set up the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. They are a set of 17 development goals and 169 targets. They want to help find solutions for climate change, city planning, gender equality, and almost everything else. At their core, though, the SDGs are about getting rid of poverty. The UN says that the SDGs are a bold promise to finish what we started with the Millennium Development Goals and end all kinds of poverty by 2030. UN Women, UNDP, and the Pardee Center for International Futures have made new predictions about global poverty. They say that 388 million women and girls will be living in extreme poverty around the world in 2022. But things could be a lot worse. In case of high damage, this number could rise to 446 million. According to these new predictions, 83.7% of the world's poorest women and girls would live in just two places: Sub-Saharan Africa and Central and Southern Asia. There does seem to be a little bit of progress, as this number is down from about 70% in 2015. A recent report from the Brookings Institution said that for the first time in decades, more Africans are getting out of poverty than are falling into it. World Data Lab says that by 2030, only 11 of Africa's 54 countries will be able to get rid of extreme poverty. Almost all of the countries expected to meet the target are either in North Africa or are small island republics. Only 12 other countries are expected to fall short of the SDG goal in the rest of the world. How the challenge of reducing poverty is massive? Both IFs and the World Data Lab predict that the trend of poverty going down will change. In other words, the number of people living in poverty in Africa is expected to grow over the next 10 years. This means that Africa is expected to bear the brunt of poverty. Africa's fast population growth is an undeniable cause of this long-term rise in poverty. IF says that between 2015 and 2030, the number of poor people in Africa is expected to drop by nearly 5 percentage points. Even though the percentage of people living in poverty is going down, it is expected that the number of people living in poverty will more than double between 2015 and 2030, from about 270 million to more than 550 million. The end of extreme poverty must be at the heart of any comprehensive plan for Africa's development, no matter who writes the guiding documents. African governments, development agencies, non-governmental organizations, and civil society all need to come up with policies and push for strategies whose main goal is to end poverty. The amount of money needed to reach all of the SDGs is huge, and it may be too much for African governments to handle without a lot of help from the rest of the world. Even if Africa only cut extreme poverty in half from where it is now by 2030, that would be a big step in the right direction. But it is said that Africa is set to get wealthier by its second generation. But how could this be possible in near future? Did the second generation are really fortune changers of Africa through their technological innovations? That brings us to the end of the video. Feel free to let us know what you think about this video. And if you like this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for all things. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.